We're very glad to welcome everybody today. My name is Tracey Deutsch, and I'm on the leadership team of Minnesota Transform. For the sake of access, I am a short white woman with dark curly hair that has a little bit of gray in it. Today, I'm wearing a green and silver scarf and a black jacket and black pants. I'm thrilled to be here and to welcome you to today's session with Indigenous project leaders and participants. Our collaborations support decolonizing knowledge and resources have been at the core of Minnesota Transform. And today you will get to hear about work supporting Indigenous language education for college undergraduates, language preservation, an oral history lab, language education and access for community members, and what we have learned from all of these projects. A few notes just to get ourselves oriented. Today's event is hybrid. Before we get started, I want to check in about a few logistics. For folks in person and on Zoom who are participating by listening, how is my volume? Sounds okay.
Tracey, this is Angela speaking. Volume is good.
Okay, thank you. For folks in person and on Zoom who are using Site to participate, can you see me all right? Okay, thank you. Live professional captioning is available via the Zoom captions feature or the stream text link added in the chat. In-person participants can also pull up the stream text link on your personal devices. When our presenters begin, we will share any available access copies or materials digitally. There are also print copies in the back of the room. We want to encourage everyone to be in the space and our digital space in whatever way best supports your engagement. That can include getting up, walking around, stimming, doing yoga, laying down, taking a break, do what you need to do. Please help yourself to drinks and refreshments, which include gluten and dairy-free options in the back of the room. Minnesota Transform is committed why did it do that? Sorry, technical glitch. Here we go. Okay. Minnesota Transform is committed to making our events as inclusive and accessible as possible for all our community members, because health justice and disability justice are a part of racial justice and Indigenous sovereignty. We know that systemic inequity means that marginalized people and populations, especially those who are negatively racialized, are more likely to experience disabling conditions than people and populations with more social privilege and resources. This, of course, includes the devastating impacts of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Masks are available if you need one. Thank you for helping us provide this important care for our community members who are immunocompromised, disabled, elderly, and caregivers. Are there any other access or support needs that folks would like to discuss? If something comes up, please don't hesitate to let us know so we can pause and address needs. Our next step in welcoming you all is to acknowledge that the University of Minnesota was not only built on unceded Dakota land, but built with the profits from selling thousands of acres of Dakota and Anishinaabe land. Both forms of injustice demand accountability and reparations in the form of expanded accessibility to the U's Native American Promise tuition program, sustained funding for the American Indian Studies Department and Native-led student groups, and meaningful collaboration with Minnesota's 11 Native nations to self-determine what land back means regarding the 30,000 acres of land the U currently owns. And I want to be clear that that's not the limit of the kind of accountability and reparations that are needed in this moment. Just last week, a 500-page report called Truth was released, detailing our university's role in Native dispossession and exploitation. We encourage you to review it and demand their reparations recommendations. You can access and read the full Truth report at the Z link, which is on this slide. We also have executive summaries printed out and available for you to take with you in the back of the room. Minnesota Transform is a major higher education initiative engaging anti-colonial and racial justice work through the public humanities at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities and across the state of Minnesota. Supported by a Just Futures Mellon grant, Minnesota Transform puts humanities on the front lines through numerous public and university partnerships and hundreds of student internships on racial justice. On campus, Minnesota Transform lays the groundwork for structural changes that expand the university's racial justice work. Minnesota Transform is part of and helps to support universities' reckoning with racism, dispossession, and exclusion in ways that reimagine the university and elaborate its possibilities. We want to thank the Mellon Foundation, whose Just Futures initiative we are proud to be part of. The Institute for Advanced Study incubated this project and has been a crucial home for us. We're very grateful to them. Today, we are also welcomed by the Liberal Arts Engagement Hub, whom we thank for their help. We also want to thank the many staff, students, colleagues, and especially community members who joined in our projects, made things work, and whose energies have made this event and MNT possible. Today's event is part of a week-long series of events that highlight the projects done by Minnesota Transform partners. You can check out our website at minnesotatransform.com for more information. This afternoon, we will be featuring a workshop on Whose Campus, about an innovative platform for remapping campuses in ways that reflect alternative and subjugated knowledges. You're very welcome to stay in the hub for that event or to leave and return. And tomorrow at 1 p.m., we will have a roundtable about 5 different oral history projects that we have supported on the possibilities of oral histories for racial and Indigenous justice. Later tomorrow, we will feature a roundtable in conjunction with the Institute for Advanced Study on the administrative practices that can support ethical public engagement or that can stand in its way. We welcome you to all of these events. Today, however, we thank you for coming here. We have several presentations and I want to be sure that everyone has time to speak. I'm going to try not to cut anyone off, but I will also ask us to be sure that everyone has enough time. We are going to begin with a presentation by Deacon DeBoer and Zoe Brown to discuss Ojibwe Wigamig and Dakota Iapi Tipi, respectively the Ojibwe Immersion House and Dakota Immersion House, available to University of Minnesota students. For the duration of this grant, Minnesota Transform has subsidized housing costs for students in these spaces. And today, Zoe and Deacon will share what these experiences were like. I'm going to invite Zoe and Deacon to come up. As they do that, I want to just briefly introduce them in English, and then they will say more about themselves in Ojibwe and Dakota. Deacon grew up near present-day Granite Falls, Minnesota, and is a graduate student at the university, earning a master's degree in heritage studies and public history. Zoe Brown has been the first and second year Ojibwe language teacher here at the U for the last 7 years and teaches language planning and immersion methods in AIS. She is a Black non-heritage learner of Ojibwe-Moan, a graduate of the AIS department in the U of M's language program, and a current PhD student in linguistics. She is here today as the co-faculty lead for the Ojibwe Immersion House. Right. You guys please leave. Okay. Swap out the presentation here quick. Are we still good on volume while I do this? Because we can also grab the mic if needed.
This is Angela speaking, the Zoom support. If you could please use the mic, that would be great to make sure that our captionists can also hear the audio and caption as accurately as possible.
Absolutely. Is this good?
It's still a little muted. Could you try again? Or,
yes. Is it, do you think it's a placement issue or?
I think that's better. Yeah, placement perhaps. And then also maybe if you can turn up the mic on the computer that is in Tracey's computer, the one that's logged into the Zoom, that's possible.
Let me take a look at our audio settings.
Thank you.
Yes. So, oh, yep, that's pretty low. Let's see if we try. That's your report day. Yeah. Is this any better?
Yeah, that's a bit better.
Okay. Okay, how about now? Is that improved?
It's about the same.
Okay.
Just I think it's all right. Do the best you can. Thank you so much for
yeah.
for help, for supporting.
Yeah, thank you all. Okay, I'm gonna share this screen here. All right. Okay. Aninga kina uya, Zoe Indigenous cause, Zoe Dashanisha Indigenous Canigo, Kakabikang and Dunchiba, Makadewi Aseque and Dow, when Jiki Masi what can do them. And Gochigo, Medaso, Babuna, Washame, and Bekawegi came down on Wayman. Misako get your pitin the man, Anishinabe Moen, Ojibwe Moen, Nagayo Asia Chigang Goma, Jikawegi came the monk. Neo what Tashin the man nongom, Mioma got Tashisaka to be a gay, nin. Miomagae in the Nokian, Misago get Nigacho in the man, Bakitani Guyan, Jigawegi in the man or women, Nagae Omaja Yayan. Nashki, thank you all so much for coming to hear a little bit about our immersion house programs. I just introduced myself. My name is Zoe Brown. I'm a Black non-heritage learner of Ojibwe Moen. I'm a graduate of this language department, and I have been teaching in the department since I graduated, since 2016. I primarily teach first and second year Ojibwe language, and I'm really grateful to be here today on so many levels. I'm grateful to be here today with Deacon, and we'll hopefully be able to let you know a little bit about sort of the setup of our programs and how much Minnesota Transform has helped to support these programs. Okay. So up to the next one. So the first thing I'd like to do here at the Minnesota Transform Showcase is wholeheartedly express what a massive impact that the funding from MNT has made, not just on the immersion houses, but on our language programs on the whole. Funding from MNT has supported community language scholarship across the last 2 years and has helped us to see some of the largest class sizes that we've ever had in this department. Through these scholarships, we're able to serve learners all across Anishinaabe or King, all across the continent, and creating access to these language courses for any community member who wants to take language here by mitigating the financial barrier that comes with these programs being housed in an institution is something that is so incredibly important to what we're trying to do here. So it's only been through the generous funding support of Mille Lacs Band for Ojibwe Wikamig and Minnesota Transform that we've been able to get this program off the ground and that our students have been able to start living together here in the language. So I'd like to share with you a bit today about what immersion housing is, how it rounds out our language programming here, and then we'll be in conversation with Deacon around Dakota Yapi TP. Okay. So just to place us in time a little bit, give us a little bit of context and background. As you may already be aware, this Department of American Indian Studies is among the oldest. And I was just having a great conversation before this started. And I was gonna say there's been language classes here in Dakota and Ojibwe since the very start, but even before that, right? So language classes and language programming here has always been a core part of what's been happening in this space. This has been a site of language learning, of language teaching, of language sharing for decades. And as a part of this, these programs have been passed down and inherited. And part of what we're hoping to do as language learners who are now heading this programming is to work as hard as we can to meet the changing times and the needs of those that come here to learn. So in continuing the growth and care for these programs, for both the Dakota language program and the Ojibwe language program, the faculty have worked hard in the last few years to create the language majors. This means that students that come here have the opportunity to earn their Bachelor of Arts degree in Dakota Yapi or Ojibwe Moen. For both of these, it's 4 years or 8 semesters of rigorous language courses with supporting coursework that's meant to provide and prepare majors with knowledge on language reclamation movements on the whole, and the landscape of language work with the multitudes of things that are possible upon graduation and beyond, carrying the language with you. The language programs offer a robust foundation of study, input, practice, thoughtful instruction, and learning. But listen, at maximum, we're meeting 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and that is not enough. We need more and we want more. We really do need more time and space for the language seeds that we're collectively sowing to flourish and to grow. And that's where immersion housing comes in. Ta-da. So here's the immersion house. It's a big old apartment. On the logistics side, the immersion houses here look like individual apartments within university housing. So these are apartment spaces that look like other apartment spaces, but within them, there's something extremely important going on. So within these spaces are our students who are endeavoring to spend their whole time here, not just their time in class, but their downtime, their time with their roommates, their time as friends. Everything that they're doing, in their lives here, they're endeavoring to do it in the language together, keeping the language as the means of communication. So our 2 immersion houses are located here, and I'll share a little bit about what this experience looks like for Ojibwe Wikamink. Just to keep it brief, I'm going to share from the handbook that we use at orientation, written up by the founder of Ojibwe Wikamink and the original idea haver for Ojibwe Wikamink, Dr. Brendan Kishketan. And yeah, okay. So I'm going to hop us to this. Ojibwe Wikamink, there's a 1. So the mission of Ojibwe Wikamink is to provide Ojibwe language students at the University of Minnesota an opportunity to live with their Ojibwe language learning peers in a safe and culturally appropriate environment where the Ojibwe language is the only medium of communication, and where students can use their Ojibwe language in everyday life outside the classroom. Because the Ojibwe language is an endangered language, this immersion house has been established and implemented as part of a community-wide mission to preserve the Ojibwe language for future generations and to provide students with a community of language learners where Ojibwe language can flourish. In Ojibwe Wikamink, the Ojibwe language is the focus and the activity. Because living life outside of the classroom is the activity, students have the opportunity to talk about things in Ojibwe that they might never have thought that they would have the chance to talk about. So things like laundry, food, drinks, cooking, cleaning, gossip, where that's where I'm at. Arguments, teasing, shopping, cars, transportation, love, family, everything that comes up in life. Other universities and colleges which have foreign language housing programs have demonstrated that immersion houses such as Ojibwe Wikamink and Dakota Yapi Tipi are incredibly effective in helping students develop their language skills and their fluency. Some students have noted that living in language housing has helped them more than living in countries of origin when that's an applicable status. So this is what we hope to accomplish in Ojibwe Wikamink, to create an effective space where students can make exceptional strides in their Ojibwe language learning journey, moving towards fluency and high proficiency. So what this looks like is a lot of time spent together, a lot of time working really hard, staying in immersion. And one of the biggest things that we do together in community is meals. So meals together allow our house participants to use their language in a setting where everyone is present. It creates opportunities to learn and use new language of the different types of things that come up, just thinking about what you talk about with your family and your friends at the end of the day, sharing food together. Whatever promotes language use is our main goal. In regards to other activities, because just living life, going to school, holding down a job, keeping close to home, all in Ojibwe language is already enough. It's quite a bit to be doing. We don't have, specific other pieces that they're required to do in order to learn the language, right? What our students are doing is they're learning the language by living in the house with their peers, with their classmates, with their fellow language learners. This is the language learning activity. Everyone who lives in Ojibwe Wikamink is also welcome to plan and do whatever activities they want. And I can report on lots of fun things that come out when we have time. So study groups, we've done, meetups at restaurants where we're speaking the language with each other, workout groups, grocery shopping, going to different ceremonies in the community. doing things like yoga or just watching movies and working to do that all together in the language. So one of the last pieces that One writes in our handbook is, he says, we do not want the Ojibwe Wikamik to be a burden on any student. Students are busy enough. Ojibwe Wikamik is your home. And so make it a place where you are happy, stress-free, and comfortable. We want to garner an environment where the Ojibwe language is not associated with feelings of stress, anger, frustration, or sadness. Rather, we want our students to feel good about what they are doing and feel good at going at their own speed and learning the language at a level that they are comfortable with. We want students to have fun. That's a little bit from our handbook, just giving a bit of background on, what are some of the core goals and what it looks like for Ojibwe Wikamik. A couple of things I'll add is that we're 3 years strong. So this is the third cohort, the third year of Ojibwe Wikamik. Across the 3 years, we've had students repping Fond du Lac, Mille Lacs, Bad River, Red Cliff, St. Croix, LCO, Lac Seul, Red Lake. I think that one of the most beautiful things about Ojibwe Wikamik is that these students are making friendships and connections for life, being a part of this experience. They're not only growing their language, but they're strengthening the connections between communities and between these up and coming speakers. And looking to the future, this strengthens the support net across the language revitalization movement as a whole, to have these future language leaders bonded in this amazing community living, learning experience and space. Ojibwe Wikamik is truly like a family. I asked my group this year what they would most want me to say about it, and that was their comment, was that, they're really connected as a family would be. And the other piece is that it becomes a firsthand experience and kind of like a practice run for what it feels like to recreate a home and community space where you are living together in a language, which is everything that we're trying to do here and support with our language programming. So I'd like to share just one more thing. So as you can see, our growing, changing logos. One of the things that was really cool that Minnesota Transform allowed us to do this year with programmatic funds was to commission the artwork that will go on to represent the Ojibwe Wikamik for years to come. And so I want to sort of unveil that for us today. So this was designed by an original Ojibwe Wikamik, a founding resident, Gabrielle Farrell, and she used her experiences to create a design that represents what makes this language program unique. She says, and I'll quote here, with logos, it is important that it is relatively simple, but also unique and recognizable. There is a versatility in clean designs that allows you to use it in a wide variety of contexts and platforms, but it can get tricky to have a clean logo when there are so many things to include or represent. I decided to incorporate the fire since this has been a key message in my life this past year representing our language. A foundational belief of Ojibwe Wikamik is in order to keep the language alive, we need to bring the language into the home. So it seemed fitting that the fire was inside the weeklong. I then also included the moon over top the weeklong. I thought this was fitting since the majority of time students spend together is at night in the house, which is notably different than other language programs and classes. Representing a program I love and believe in has been phenomenal. Logos can be a reflection of those manidug helping the students and you all along in your work. Gainin weweni and binda kunag and you manidug jawinda maguasian wegunin gamas nabi aman. It is really special to be able to draw something that represents all of this. So I want to close the Ojibwe Wikamik portion by saying miigwech minoa to Mille Lacs, to MNT. Support and funding is absolutely necessary to the success of programs like this, and it has a direct impact on language reclamation as a whole to support the young people who are passionate about language health and language society. And with that, we got a cool young person right here. We got Deacon here, who's going to talk to us about Dakota Yapi people.
My apologies for not putting the bio in the slide, but Hami Takiepi, Chante Washte, na Pechi Zapi, Deacon Miedo, Washichi, Deacon Amakiapi, though, Dakota Chaze Beduheshni, and Damakota Kawa Mashichu, Oyata Mitawa King, CC Tuanka, Norwegian, French, Dutch, Croatian, Wicha Kiapido, Marshall Otunwe, Granite Falls, Otunwe Hedge, Yatahawahi. Chanka, Popo, we Wapi, Akeza, Ohana, Matupido. Rajuta zizi kapi ka marshal tunwe ed imachache. Bdeo to tunwe ed wati ka nakun ta huncha. Rajuta zizi kapi ed watito. Minnesota on spe on Contia ed Wabadawado. Heritage Studies and Public History on spe michie. Minnesota e hana woya kapi omanaye tipi ed tawani. My name is Deacon. It's nice to greet you all with a kind handshake. And also on Petukin de Dankad, Magaju ka Owashiche Taka Owashtechake. Today is a little rainy, a little gloomy outside, but it's still beautiful. My name is Deacon, as I said. I do not have a Dakota name, but I am Dakota. I'm also Washichu, taker of the fat. That's what Washichu is actually translated to. But my family's from Pejuta Zizikapi. It's a place where we dig for the yellow medicine. A lot of people know it as the Upper Sioux community, but Sioux actually derives from Nottoway Sioux. I'm not sure how to say it in Ojibwe, but it roughly translates to lesser than a snake or something roughly across those lines. And it was taken from French fur traders and misinterpreted as who we were as Dakota people here. And that's not what I like to coin myself as in our community at Upper Sioux, because we are Pejuta Zizikapi. It's a place the land where we dig for the yellow medicine. And there's a lot of stories of what that yellow medicine is, whether it's the ginseng root, ginseng, or the moonseed plant. Both are really good for gut health, as well as male sexual reproduction health. And there's Super Labatt from our community actually talks about going down into Chetanwak Padan, where I grew up. It's the Hot Creek area. It dumps into the Minnesota River Valley. And in 1867, there's a Granite Falls Tribune article of these women going down there to harvest this ginseng. And so what I'm getting at is this Pejuta Zizi it's there. It's a medicine. And it's something that I like to talk about and think about even here at our immersion house. Kind of why I'm relating this is because a lot of what the immersion house has given me is the opportunity to maintain my relationship with the creator, maintain my relationship with different types of beings like those plants. I guess I'm getting a little bit farther into where I was going with this, but I'm in the Heritage Studies and Public History program. I'm first year in that, and it's a 2-year program, which I see one of my supervisors in the back. Hello, Kevin. And going to be working at Native American initiatives. I'm an intern with them. Going forward, I just wanted to say a little bio before we got into what we're going to say about the immersion house in terms of a kind of back and forth with a question and answer. So we'll see. It's going to be kind of flexible. So bear with us.
Awesome. So the first question that we have for you, Deacon, is as a resident, what has been one of your main takeaways from living in the immersion house?
At first, Taryn Long is my roommate. She's from Pine Ridge and she's amazing. At first, I had no idea, who she was. I had worked at an American Indian Summer Institute in the summer, and we were all nervous with each other to begin with. But I think one of the main takeaways that I have is, once again, maintaining that relationship with Tukashida and the creator, and having that opportunity to do that in a household that isn't constantly having an energy of university life, kind of pounding against the walls sometimes. But with my roommate, we've made that a safe space for the spirituality of Tukashida. And it's really important for us. I think that's my main takeaway, because before it, I didn't know her. And now we're actually at the point where she's knocking on my door at 12 if she's, at night if she needs something. And that's really important. And on top of that, you wake up in the morning, you smell some smudge going on, like that makes you really comfortable. And it makes it comfortable for the language after that. So when you're coming home and you might have a question from class with Shishoka Duta earlier in the day, because we are both in class with Shishoka Duta at this time. And that's Joe Ben Dixon. When we come home and we might have a question that's really challenging, we might just sit down for a while and hammer out that whole assignment. And I think that's one of the best things to have. So,
absolutely, that's what's up. My next question for you is, how has the language helped to shape your daily life?
Yeah, constantly thinking about it on campus, outside of the radius when I'm walking around, you're thinking, what is it? What is that tree called, Chan? Or what, how did it change me though? More than you can ever imagine in terms of thinking about where I'm at in Minnesota Makoche. And we're so close to Bedote and Witatonka, but up here by the University of Awamani and St. Anthony Falls right over there. And I think being in place and knowing the language, that's been really impactful for me on campus here, considering the university's ties with land grab. And yeah.
Absolutely. My third question for you, Deacon, is what do you see as the opportunity for Immersion House in the future, right? Do you see that as something sustainable, something living on? What are your thoughts for the future of Immersion Houses?
Yeah, kind of hinting off of what you were talking about with the Ojibwe House, Dakota Yapi Tipi is something that I think is imperative for us Dakota students to feel comfortable with the language here on the university, because I think it's been a known thing that it has been very Ojibwe centric in terms of some of the settings that you walk into on campus. It has not been Dakota centric. So having a place where you can feel comfortable with your relatives and speak the language is more than important for me. I don't think I would have done as good as I did this year if I didn't have Taryn and the Dakota Yapi Tipi. Let me think about that question here a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something where I feel like, just being able to have the opportunity to live with your fellow students and, go from, classmate kind of relationship to, like we were talking about before, you have a friend for life. You have someone who you can count on, and you have someone who you have a relationship with in the language, which is something that can hardly be described and, can't be replaced. So building up those lifelong connections with fellow language learners is something that, I hope that, the immersion houses are setting up for our students. Yeah.
I've also had plenty of folks, Dakota relatives of mine, that are coming up and asking, what are the opportunities in the future to be involved with this house? I want to come to the university just because of this Dakota Immersion House. And not knowing if it necessarily is going to be going next year, that kind of has my heart a little bit sad, but I think there's going to be a lot of people that are interested to keep this going. And on the question of sustainability, it has to be, right?
Yeah. We'd like to now open it up to questions, Q&A from our audience, both joining us online and in person. I'm thinking if there's someone in the room, I could bring the mic to you and see, if there's any questions like that. Okay. We got our chat. Oh, nice. There's our slides. That's what's up. No, I think no, you're good. Yeah, any questions? Yeah, Vince. Let me bring this back.
I can project.
All right. That's our chair, everybody.
Thank you, Deacon and Zoe. I just had a comment that we're going to demand that as part of the demands that the university funds the immersion notes and a bunch of other stuff.
I have a question for Deacon. How do you use the knowledge and experience that you gain from the immersion house outside of the campus? And then also, how do you see what you've done there and what you've learned there after UMN?
Yeah, so I've been a historical interpreter with MNHS since about 2019, and that's developed a really comfortable energy in me to go out and interpret on Dakota language or Dakota ethnographies and epistemologies and Dakota Wichahan, Dakota ways of life. Whether that be just for my family or for my friends, or on canoe trips and with Canoe Rising, and just going out and talking by the river. But I would say mainly it's been that, once again, that relationship with the creator that I can actually talk with him outside of the house or talk with him outside. And I think mainly it's a hard question, because before I got into college, I was really surrounded by a Washichu economy, in terms of not thinking about what a gift economy was. And when I got here to the University of Minnesota and I was involved with COIN, Circle of Indigenous Nations, and American Indian Student Cultural Center, it really opened up my eyes to thinking about what a relationship is, what that reciprocity can be with whether it's the river or me and a person like Taryn or Zoe. And realizing that we can help each other out through that language, and realizing we can help each other out in thinking about certain things like reciprocity with the river. Sorry if I didn't answer that question correctly, but I think we can talk about that more for sure.
Any other questions? Practice my teacher wait time. Yeah, David.
What was one of the biggest happy surprises that for you? Because I know a lot of students would be intimidated about going in, and they might like to know what are the things you didn't expect that were good for you.
There's a lot. Once again, not knowing Taryn at all going in, and then now we have this relationship where we can cry with each other. And Glenn Washington told me one time, he's a first language speaker and teaches at Mankato State. Your tears, when they go straight to the creator, and that's one of your prayers, each tear. And I think it's so important to be able to cry with someone. So that's been a really happy thing. And also another happy thing to come out of it is the living atmosphere. I mean, I love my room. I've made it my own space. We have a very good working atmosphere in terms of when we do homework, we're as quiet as can be. Tomorrow on Thursday, we're going to be cooking banana bread and talking Dakota, So there's these happy things that come in just developing that relationship with someone. And then on top of just speaking the language, being around the university, I have never lived on campus before. So that's been a whole new thing for me and has really helped me in my education, because this is my first year in my master's program. I don't think I would have done as well in school as I would have if I was off campus. So. Any other questions? I think we are on time.
Thank you all very much. We'll take maybe a 10-minute break and then get yourself set, and we'll come back and hear about the Dakota Language Journal. Okay, thank you everybody, and welcome back. Please continue to help yourselves to food and drink in the back and to get up and do whatever you need to do. I'd like to welcome Raine Cloud and Ric Bertsch to share their incredible work leading the Dakota Language Journal, which is a really remarkable resource that's being created to make Dakota language available both to speakers, students, and also to educators. I should add that Shoshone Duta, whose name you've heard before, also leads this project, and he couldn't be with us today because he's at a conference for Dakota educators. So it's just wonderful to feel part of this ecosystem of Indigenous language education and immersion. I'll offer quick introductions here to Raine and Ric, and then let them introduce themselves and talk more about the journal. Raine Cloud is a Dakota who is an enrolled member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate and lives in Sisseton, South Dakota, and drove here to be here today. She received her Dakota language teaching certificate at the U. She's currently the Dakota Language Online Audio Journal Coordinator and also works part-time as a Dakota language facilitator at Sisseton Wahpeton College. And teaches, on top of that, she teaches a Dakota language course for absolute beginners. Her focus is on innovative and creative ways of teaching and learning the Dakota language while keeping true to cultural ways. Ric Bertsch is the director of the Dakota Language Institute on the Lake Traverse Reservation. He's been working closely with Dakota elders and has been learning the Dakota language for 12 years. He is working on making new recordings and translating for the Dakota Language Audio Journal. How is the volume and everything on Zoom? Should we go back to the mic, or is this okay?
Tracey, this is Angela speaking. I think it's okay, but let me check in with our captionists and be sure, because the mics are really helpful for everyone, okay. even if you project for the captioning. So let me check in and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Tracey, this is Angela. I think we're good with the audio so far, with the sound so far, but I will let you know if we need to shift anything. And thanks for asking.
Sure, that's fine. Is this, can you see Dakota Language Audio Journal slide?
Yes, I can. And I've also put the link for this presentation in the chat if anyone in Zoom land needs to pull it up on their screen for their own access.
Magaji e Mahiafia, Sisituan, Betuan, Oyate, and Omalapi. Wakbetuan ga Videokato Wia Hamacha. Authentic there, Dakota Language Audio Journal, you will open up there. When I need
we talk up here. Was the heap can you know, Chanteo and pennies up here, open up Tonka heap. Zania, dead on here, care, or country chunk was still cooking a cup. And then I open a tongue for up here. It's just a Tokia warping kita, Ichi Datam sneaky hair, okay. I like to excuse myself. Tokich said, the Kodia pay warping here was it. He do time, he had that time pick here. Ishe, Tokit kid, was he to cut the Kuta which all hanky, Ichicha here and Yaketia. We won't have you have Kihan. Ishe continue to check your but I had said, do which a more like Isha, which up with that. She had Chimitaki up here, make to Japa. I had said, we won't okay, you have Kia Katia Chetka Ayupta. I had said. Okay. So first, just excusing ourselves, a social law in Dakota is if we were going to do this presentation system, I would have to be making her presentation for her. She would have to be doing my presentation for me, just in front of our elders. And social law again is first of all, we have to just excuse ourselves for talking about work we've done in a which would be considered bragging. So after we've done that, you know, that switches the code, gives us permission to get into this, and we're really excited to be here. So, excited to be here. Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about, in English, my name is Raine Cloud. I'm from Siston, Wapton, Oyate. And I work remotely over there. And so we're here today talking about the Dakota Language Audio Journal and just what we've been working on over there. And so I'm the Dakota Language Audio Journal coordinator. That role has expanded. I feel like my duties have expanded. I have no one to coordinate, so. So we're going to talk about the Dakota Language Audio Journal, and it is an online, it's going to be an online resource for Dakota language learners, teachers, just self-taught learners, anyone who wants to just hear the language. Right now, there's not too many places where you can just go and freely access hearing Dakota, the language of this region, you know. So we get recordings, we talk to our elders, and we transcribe, translate interviews done with these fluent elders, first language speakers. So we're going to talk a little bit about our process and what it takes to make an audio journal, I guess. So why do we need an audio journal? You know, it's an online archive. It's going to be an online archive of recordings of our elders. We're going to have like the Dakota, the literal translation, and then like the English better translation. It'll be a resource again for teachers and students. And it'll just be a place where people can learn cultural knowledge, stories, teachings, but hear it in the language. And I feel like that is so rich, you know, like I feel like once it gets down to English, it kind of gets filtered. So when you learn it in the language, it's like, it's so full, you know. And so why this is important is because, you know, we have a different Dakota worldview, you know, and that's expressed through our language. You know, how we see the world, how we talk is like expressed through our language. And it's not the same in English all the time. So I think that's really important to preserve. Our language is, was always learned, you know, our elders always talk about how they were kids and they learned the language by hearing their parents and their grandparents talk. Unfortunately, us second language learners, we don't have access like that mostly. Most of us didn't grow up in fluent households. And so we don't have the exposure to the language like they did. And so, you know, sadly, you know, we're losing our elders. You know, in 20 years, we may not have fluent elders, first language speakers like that. And so it's just really important for us to preserve that and just to have a place for people to hear the language and learn the language that don't have access to elders. So, so do you want to add to that? Okay.
So in terms of intergenerational transmission, the amount of speakers, it can, it's, although few, one of the most important things that I'm seeing is the leveraging of technology and how it's just really the potential for reaching across the state of Minnesota, Canada, reservations, and all communities in need for our Dakota language schools, immersion nests, Dakota and Lakota. But as far as the reach that this project has the potential to do, I can see it going very far with that. Immensely impactful. In Siston, we have roughly 40 first language speakers. And particularly the recordings that we're working on in this project, they're directed towards capturing cultural knowledge from personal experience from our fluent elders over there. A fun one we're working on right now is how to clean a snapping turtle, which is eaten, you know, and it's still to this day. We did one last summer. It was a blast. One of our fluent elders, you know, they're honoring things, so you got to watch out for them, of course. And the funny thing is that they're joking about if you don't pay attention, if let's say I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and we're trying to get a young man to, okay, this guy needs a little bit, he needs a lesson on listening. We'll set him up. One of the elders will set him up for capturing a snapping turtle and really imposing the fact that you got to follow directions or there's going to be very serious consequences. And so that's what they're joking about and laughing about in one of these recordings. And Kushi, her brothers, you know, they have this particular time where this recording is actually captured. We're transcribing it, translating right now. A couple of her brothers particularly have trouble paying attention and following rules. So that's the significance of that story, especially that lesson. That's just one example. We have several fabulous recordings that are in there with deep lessons attached to there, so they can just be again, the reach will be enormous. So that the importance of that is just it's just going to be deeply impactful. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about recording. So the approach is you feed the elders, you have a blast with them, you get them talking about something that they like to talk about. Everything in the environment is just as how you see, yep, just how you see here. Oh, there's me over there in the red shirt. Jeez. Well, thankfully they're comfortable in those environments right now. Right there, one picture is the SWC log cabin, and the other one's the Dakota Language Institute, where I'm blabbing away in the red shirt over there in front of everybody. But what you don't see is that there's a meal, and we spend roughly 3 hours. So it's just not smash and grab approach. We feed them, we get comfortable, we get them chatting, and then particularly if we have something we wish to ask for specifically, we have that prepared. And culturally, you know, if it's a woman knowledge or if it's a woman practice, we'll have Hankashi would probably, or me, I would ask if it's a male thing, like hunting or something like that. Snapping. Who does snapping turtle? Is that women's work or men's work? We choha. Oh, so the women do it. I didn't know that. I just found that out just now. So that's the approach. Comfortability, respect, of course, keeping things light. And then when it comes down to it, we have to adhere to our social laws and kinship roles, everything like that. And then so when it comes down to whomever would be asking the elder with the particular knowledge we're asking for, yeah. And then of course a gift really pushes things, you know, in the right direction. So that's and then that's how it goes. Everybody is usually a room about this amount of people, and ideally you have 3 generations there. You have a young family with their children, Hankashi's daughter Minnie, and you have our elders there. You have younger elders, then you have male and female, and then you have children there. So it's all intergenerational transmission all happening at once. So recordings have really we've really thickened the approach, and really proud of how that happens. So it's quite the experience. People come in to just witness it and to be a part of it and enjoy some good food together. And then sometimes they'll add the gift, or yeah, it's quite the event now. So yeah.
And I think too, our elders really like to be together. They don't like to just be in a room by themselves. Like how you would really want to get a recording is to be in a soundproof room, have a microphone. But in that sterile environment, it really doesn't bring real language. You get like this really sterile language, like it's just what you want to hear. But in visiting and setting up an atmosphere where we're eating and talking, it lightens the mood. And I feel like more stories, more the true language just flows from that. So it's kind of a different approach. I know in the past, language preservation, it's really been done in a way to capture good audio. So we work with it, and I think this is the best way we've found working with elders, that they're going to talk to us and tell us really good stories. So it's getting like the best, And so for a short time, we had a partnership with the Sistine Wapton College. We had a linguist, his name was Josh Waite, and he did some of our interviews that are going to be on the audio journal. So they were part of it. They had plans to do curriculum and stuff like that, but things change, people leave, so things changed. So we didn't have that same resource for them to develop curriculum from these audio So it kind of changed the plan of things when Josh left, because he was like the one who had the vision for what that looked like and how the college could work with us. So we had to work around that, and we still are. You know, it's really, we're thankful for the recordings that he did, because he got some really good recordings for us for the audio journal. And so we're going to just talk about like the process of what we're doing over there in Siston. Getting our, first we get the recordings. Then after we have recordings, we use a program called Elon, and we're just going to kind of show you like basically what it looks like. So I don't know if you guys can hear it, but this is basically what it looks like to, we have to listen to the audio recording, kind of segment what we want to use in the program. And right now, Clifford Chunku is talking. So he's really an elder that's easy to listen to, easy to understand. I don't know if you guys could hear the recording, but it's kind of very easy to understand. And so I just kind of go through that. And then from there, we go into the transcription mode, where we're just transcribing transcribing what's in Dakota, which sounds really easy, but like, think about the way you talk, like words get smashed together, things get truncated. This isn't my first language. So it's like really hard sometimes. Clifford Chunku is definitely one of the elders that he's super easy to understand, because he's like, he was an instructor, a professor, so he really speaks well. But some of our other recordings, it's a little bit more challenging, takes a little bit more time. I have a lot of question marks when I don't understand something, and Ric's pretty good about getting the parts that I don't understand. So I really needed to work with somebody with an ear for listening to fluent speakers, and so that's where Ric has really been instrumental in this project, in helping me with all the little question marks, like what they say. And then also like some of the things that we say, like the translation in the dictionary may not cover all the meanings of that one word. So it's in context of what we're saying. A lot of what Dakota is in context, like one word has different kinds of meanings in the way it's used. And so, or how that particular elder uses a word. And so that's another thing that the next step after transcribing would be to translate. And so we're giving like the literal translation, kind of like the dictionary translation of that word, if you want to go look it up, what it would say, and trying to keep to the context of what the story is. And then the second part would be to have the English translation, the good English translation, because literal English doesn't always sound good. And I think of it as like a riddle to me. So it's like a riddle, like, what they're saying, but how do I say this in English? I'm not good at that part yet. So I really am thankful for Ric, who can make it sound really good in English. So that's kind of been some of our process, just working in Elon. And then the third part would be for us to have what it's going to look like on our website. So we had a lot of like ideas over the time, recordings we wanted to do, and just a lot of dreaming. And really, this is kind of one of the ideas that we came up with, just kind of having something that highlights the words a lot. So, and we've been working with Sebastian Alfonso. Has helped us to make my dreams come true. Like, this is what I want it to look like, and he's been able to help me to get it to look like this. So I've been so thankful for that. We've just trying to find different routes of making this look good and present it, in a way that sounds good, looks good, sounds good, that's easy to learn. This may change, we're not like, this is kind of like the idea that we have. So he's just been working on that. for us. So yeah, so if you guys as language people or just the audience, like it would be really nice to get feedback. If you're like, that looks awful, don't do that. Tell me. So I think one of the things that we've been really dreaming about, like this is kind of the plan of this has changed over time. In the beginning, there was like a whole lot of involvement. You know, we had a linguist, we had people to write curriculum, we had more direction, and it seemed really like a lot of people, and it's kind of like dwindled down. And so I think our vision has changed over, like, what can we do, you know, like with this. So, I mean, we hope that somebody, or you know, maybe teachers will use this to develop their own curriculum, using stories, teaching culture. You know, in Dakota, like as Ric was saying, you know, our way of life and the way we conduct ourselves is still very important and relevant, especially on the reservation, and especially dealing with our own people. And so, you know, a lot of these stories like are a good way that have always through generations guided us on how we conduct ourselves. And so I think that's really important for us to preserve that knowledge. And, you know, I think too, one of the dreams is just to have people connect over these recordings, like maybe discuss and talk. And, you know, when it comes down to it, language is about community and relationship. And so, I mean, I would love to see this being a component of being able to, like, you know, let's listen to this recording and talk about it, or, you know, what language did you learn, you know, whatever. I mean, I think that would be a really cool part. And also we're just thinking about preservation. Like, I hope that, you know, when people hear a recording of fluent elders and they're like, they start questioning what they learned from a textbook or in the classroom. And they're like, oh, I didn't know this word meant that, or I didn't know you could talk about like this, like that, you know. And it's kind of like broadening their language. Like, I really feel like in the future, I want to make sure that people are talking like people and not like books. And so I think this is a really important resource for that not to happen, you know, in the future, you know. And so one of the things too is like when our elders are a little bit reluctant to be recorded, I like to tell them, you know, the selling point is like your kids and your grandkids will hear you speak Dakota. You know, like this is a place where, you know, because I feel like our elders are a little bit, you know, because some of them are from that boarding school era, some of them know of that, some of them are raised by boarding school parents. So, you know, like the mistrust between an institution, especially like an institution like the university, if I know they are a little bit, they don't trust it quite, you know. And so I think it's really good that we have Ric and myself who live in the community, who are around our elders, who have been doing this work for a lot of years. Really helps with that, you know, really helps with, because I know that they don't always trust an institution. So that's why we're over there in Siston working remotely, because it would be really hard to, you know, they would be like, who's this person? Why are they, what do they want? What are they going to take from us? You know, that's kind of the attitude sometimes outsiders get. And so it's just really good to have people from the community who have already been working in language to take on this work, because they know us, you know. And they know our dedication to the language, and they know our dedication to learning the language and sharing the language and teaching the language. So they've been really helpful in that. And I just feel like this is a good example of an innovative way of teaching language, because we don't always have resources directly, you know, that's just the reality of things, you know. And so teaching online, having an online archive, things like this are the way we're going to be adapting and growing as people, because we're still a culture that's very much alive and thriving. And this language is alive and thriving. And I feel like being able to adapt is showing that. Have anything to add?
Yeah, that was magnificent. Thank you for saying all that. Thank you for hearing that as well. You know, the historical significance in that. I just touched base with the chair, Vince. Yeah, I had to brag on Kashi just for a few seconds here, you know. She really is walking the walk, and you know, her experience she's gained, you know, that it's hard, it's not easy to gain the trust of our elders. And that's important that in cultivating and these harvesting or planting and you know, replanting these knowledge into the coming generations, and to formulating the relationships, you know. I guess point I should just get to you. She opens her household. She teaches our culture every Friday night to whomever. She welcomes, she puts it on Facebook. Come on, let's meet, visit. I'll teach you how to quill moccasins. So she's walking the walk big time. And so explicit and implicit trust she's gained in Siston is, I'm really proud to be sitting and working with her on this project. And so that circles on back to, you know, embodying that trust is key to gaining more recordings and expressing that vision to our elders that, okay, we can leverage technology. We can do that. And our traditional knowledge, it can be transmitted, you know, from great grandparents, mother, father to children all over again, you know, with all of our cultural practices. And it's happening, and it's really exciting to be a part of this. So got away with bragging about you for a second.
Okay, back on. So we've been faced with some challenges. Like I said, you know, we were really in close partnership with the System Opton College in the beginning, and our linguist left, and the person to replace him didn't quite have the vision for this audio journal. And so the work wasn't being done on their side. And so it's kind of just, we've had to work around that and what it is. And I think too, like, one of the things is working within a pandemic, like people were really like didn't want to meet in person for a while there. So especially like elders who are like, you know, their health isn't the greatest, and we didn't want to like get them sick either, you know. And so it was kind of, and they don't want to be online. They don't want to like talk to Zoom, you know, like it's just, it was really hard to work around that for a time there. It was just like almost felt impossible because we were on the reservation. We had a lot of people were sick and stuff. And so it was just like, we were very aware of that. And so we just wanted to keep them safe. And so it was really hard to have those recording sessions. And I think now we're kind of back to the groove of things, and things are going better. So we're working remotely because we're in the community where we have the most fluent speakers, Dakota fluent speakers in the US, you know. And so that's why we're working in Siston, you know, because we do have a lot more speakers there. Yeah, so I think too, it was just sometimes, you know, working remotely, it's like the emails and everything get a little bit tiresome. So in the online meetings and stuff like that. So it's different than working in person. I think for me, I like to be in person. I like to talk to people. So I think too.
What do you think about, let's quickly out one. As far as like 10 minutes left.
Okay, go ahead. Okay. So yeah, one of the things too is just why we had to work through some of these challenges is, you know, we have to think about preservation in our culture and our stories and about the topics we share and the way that they're heard and told in their original way. Like that was super important to us, you know, and getting the best stories. I think that was like super important too. Did you want to talk more about that?
Preservation. I really want to take another second to thank everybody, University of Minnesota, everybody behind the curtain that was just help with the resources on this. These recordings are precious. They're very, very precious. Preservation. We got a few more minutes to talk. I was very, very thankful to talk. But again, thank you. Thank you, everyone involved. Thank you, everyone of interest, bringing awareness to this. Our elders, like I said, there's one more point I guess can make is that we only have a short amount of time left with them. The first who were raised like that, all of the social kinship laws intact, the family systems intact. Some of our fluent elders, their personal stories, you know, not mine to share entirely, but the picture is that they escaped persecution, and they found ways around the boarding schools to preserve their way of life. And hopefully that would be talked about in the future. But for right now, I can say that some of the elders that we have, their parents that are on this audio journal, their parents didn't learn English. They were just all the way up into the 70s, 40 years ago. That's a real special thing that we captured that are in this. And so going back to what I'm trying to contribute to this project is in interpretations. And so that's kind of a responsibility that we're putting our heads towards and making sure that we can do the best we can by them. But the preservation of this project, the scope of this project is just it's just magnificent. I can't say enough about it. The preservation of our culture, again, I would say it's leveraged by technology. 40 fluent speakers in Siston, very few in Minnesota, very few on the other Dakota speaking reservations. And so this is it's big. It feels good working on this and being part of it.
When I first started working with language revitalization in around 2006, there was, I think, 16 fluent first language speakers in Minnesota. And the organization I worked with is called Dakota Wichocha. And they would work with elders, and I got to know them. And you know, pretty soon I just started going to more and more funerals, you know, and it was just heartbreaking, you know. Personally, it was like, this is too hard. I don't want to do this. You know, why would I get to know somebody, you know, and go to a funeral, you know? And so I left and I went and did a different career, but actually working with language was really where I was the happiest, where I felt the most meaning to what I was doing at work. And so now we have one fluent first language speaker left, and that's Carrie Schomer. And she was an instructor here at the university. And you know, I get to visit with her once in a while. I haven't recorded her yet, but it's really, she's really, like, just to see how full circle, you know, now she's one of our treasured elders, you know. And so it's just like seeing the end, and, you know, Siston's coming close to that, you know. And sometimes I think, why would I do this work? You know, like, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it's really important. And I feel like there's a younger generation coming up that see what Ric and other people like him have done, and they're like, oh, this is how it's done. This is what you do. You sit with your elders and you learn language. You know, you rely on their definitions, you rely on their perspective, you rely on their stories, you rely on those things rather than picking up a book or an app or something. Like, I really feel like there's a shift that's happening, that where people trust what our first language fluent speakers are saying. And also, I love the various ways they talk. you know, like Clifford Chunku talks very proper and he's very easy to understand. And Kushi that was talking about the turtle, you know, she, the grandmother that was talking about the turtle, she was really, she talks different, you know, and then we have other elders that talk different. And some elders just like to joke all the time. So it's really like what they talk about and how they talk. And I feel like sometimes people, when they start learning from a book or from just class, they think that there's only one way to talk. And then they tell people, you said that wrong. But really, it's like, no, this is my way my grandma talks, you know? And so it's keeping that, the various ways, you know, from community to community, from family to family, and even personal. Like when I teach, I always say, speaker's choice, however you feel like saying it, you know, because you're going to figure it out eventually. If you start listening to Dakota, your language will change. So, I think that's about all we have. If you guys have any questions, we're here for questions. And on that pick day.
Not questions, but just to express my admiration for what you've done. It's so beautiful. As a person who's learning his own language and have been working on it, it's taking a long time, but it's so beautiful. And the way that you said the technology was important and funding was important, but you never let them get in the way of the values, which clearly guided every single thing that you did. And that was the thing that I really heard. And I really just want to just hold that up and show respect for that.
Yeah. Would you?
Also not a question, just a comment, you know, the admiration, the inspiration. I also feel the sadness, you know, that this is what you guys are doing is what so many of us are trying to do in our communities. And a big part of the sadness for me is the sort of obstacles that we face, even those of us who are trying to do this inside the university. To hear, for example, the distrust and all that, we know that, but even for those of us who are trying to funnel resources from here to the work of revitalization, that just comes down to what's really at stake, what it really means, how it feels, you know, and to be in the middle of a place that just does its business, has a wealth of resources that go to other priorities. I don't want to end on a downer here, you know. If there's a way that we can help each other get access to those funds to funnel back to projects like what you're doing, let's keep trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
When thinking about data sovereignty in this project, do you have an idea of where this might be housed in the future?
There's been some discussion. I'm currently on the board for a couple of nonprofit, or, you know, under the university. We don't know. It hasn't been decided yet. It could be under somebody else or us. And, you know, you talk about data sovereignty, which is a hot topic right now. For our, within the language, you know, there's a lot of controversy going on. And I think that has affected some of our work, is that controversy with data sovereignty. And people are really questioning, not so much the elders, I would say their children are questioning things, because they want to make sure that people aren't exploiting their parents, you know. And so it's kind of been a little bit of a roadblock in some cases. I think too, like, even if the elders like down with recording, their kids may not be, and so that's kind of been something. And also that came when people were being sick. They didn't want their parents, because sometimes you have to go through the kids or the caretakers to the elder. And so sometimes they're like, no. So those are the barriers that we've had to deal with too. And I think it's just coming down to just really explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it. And we don't really want to like exploit anyone. We really talked about having like this website like password protected, and like a lot of like you have to fill out like this form, and it's for Dakota community members only. We've talked about these things, and how do we protect our recordings, but then also how do we make them available, So without the difficulty of having to fill, because some of our elders want to hear recordings, but they don't want to fill out a whole form, and so it's been a discussion that we've had, and we're still figuring it out. And I feel like in the future we'll kind of know a little bit more. Maybe we'll see how things work out. But I hope that people in other communities will start doing this with their recordings.
I know.
Any suggestions? Can we ask that at this time? Any suggestions on that matter?
I actually wanted to ask along those lines. Was there anything in the experience that you had working with MNT and us here? Was there anything there that gives you a sense of hope that folks can begin to trust to build something here that would work for you guys?
That comes down to the way she's living her life. Yeah, she's spearheading that.
Well, I really think that having people from the community working on the project was really helpful, because it kind of breaks down another barrier, that we're not outsiders coming in to take something. We're somebody who lived there. That was really helpful. And I always felt really super supported by Minnesota Transform. They had interns and people working with us, and I always felt very thankful, for all the help that they give, and working with Sebastian now has really been cool, and just having that technical support, because I feel like a lot of my energy goes into the personal relationship part and building community, building relationships. And so, and then also just transcribing, translating, that takes a lot of time sometimes. And it's frustrating how much time it takes. And then I did have some interns doing some of the translations. And, this isn't our first language. And, so it was really, took a lot longer than I thought it would have. And so it's just time consuming sometimes to just do all that work. And then on top of it, like figure out the technical side, and that's where Minnesota Transform for me has really been super helpful, because I don't really understand like what it's supposed to look like. I just like want to do the work, I don't know how to present this really.
I didn't know how, I wasn't ready for that question. Sorry, Vince. I think I am now. Community building that that she's doing, community building and transforming trust. Yeah, so that's I think my answer, and it is a very good sign. Sorry.
Any more questions, comments, suggestions? Pidamaya, yeah.
Pidamaya.
So thank you all. We will take a 5 or 8 minute break. Come on back, and then Nick Estes is going to talk about the Indigenous Oral History Lab.
Thank you, everybody. Please continue to take care of yourself in the way you need. Help yourself to coffee and stones in the back of the room. We're going to go ahead and get started with our next session, I'd like to introduce Nick Estes. Nick is a recent colleague in the Department of American Indian Studies. We're really thrilled to have him here. Nick is an Indigenous organizer, journalist, and historian. He has co-founded the Red Nation and Red Media. In 2019, he was awarded the Lannan Literary Award Fellowship for Nonfiction. And in 2020, he was honored as the Marguerite Casey Foundation's Freedom Scholar. He was previously an assistant professor at the University of New Mexico, and now we are lucky enough that he is a faculty member in the Department of American Indian Studies here. He's the author of several books, including Our History is Our Future, On Standing Rock, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the Long Position of Indigenous Resistance, as well as Standing with Standing Rock, Voices from the #NoDAPL movement, both of which were published in 2019. In 2021, he published Red Nation Rising, From Border Town Violence to Native Liberation. Without further ado, I'm going to present Dr. Estes.
Thanks for that introduction, Tracey. And I just want to thank Minnesota Transform and all the presenters today. Learned a lot, and I think there's a lot of overlap with the project that I'm going to be presenting. And just to give an overview of what the Indigenous Oral Histories Lab is, it's a recent initiative. It was just recently funded this semester. So unlike the other presentations that were today, which are more developed project and further along, this one is kind of at the beginning stages, but we have done a lot of work. And I believe my research assistant for this project, Bethany O'Connell, is on the Zoom. So I'm also, working in collaboration with her. So the first part I just want to talk about, is just there's three long-term, or there's three goals for this project. There's a short-term project that we're working in partnership with Migizi. And then there's two long-term projects that are dedicated to the American Indian Studies Department. The first one is a project with Migizi, and Migizi recently had its 1,200 reel-to-reel tapes digitized. And so in the spring of 2020, Migizi partnered with KFAI, the community radio station here, and Augsburg College to get that digitization process underway. And I had a kind of serendipitous meeting with Melissa Olson, who was working for NPR at the time, but was also on the board of Migizi. And she told me about this amazing archival project, because we were just in this conversation about some of the oral histories that I had been working with. But just to give a little bit of background information about this archive and the founding of Migizi and the relationship that we have. In 1972, American Indian students at the University of Minnesota began to produce the Native American program. And that's some of those original recordings you can find at the archives here at the university. And it was a 5-minute daily news segment on KUOM, which is the college campus radio station at the University of Minnesota. And several years later, these same producers founded Migizi Communications. And the founding board members were R. Scott Raymond, Janice Command, Laura Waterman, Whitstock, Sherry Wilson, Henry Greencrow, Andy Marlowe, Tom Gamble, Lene Warren Sexton, and John Hirth, John Hirth is actually a graduate, one of the first graduates from the American Indian Studies Department. So there's a long history of the American Indian Studies Department and its relationship with Migizi Communications. And so I thought that was just really, fascinating. But just to kind of give you an idea of this transcription project that we're working on, the communication, or the Migizi digitized these reel-to-reel tapes over the course of a summer. They created a really massive database. I got the opportunity to listen to some of these recordings for my own research project. And Bethany O'Connell and I, Bethany is a graduate student from the Cheyenne River Reservation. She and I have been going through these
these audio recordings and beginning the transcription process. And what that means, for those of you who don't know what, I mean, the previous presentation talked a lot about it, but for oral histories, I was trained in oral histories in my graduate school at the University of South Dakota, which was home to the American Indian Research Project and also the South Dakota Oral History Center, which has the largest collection in North America of Indigenous oral histories. So if you're ever interested in looking at some of that, those materials, I helped transcribe and digitize that archive when I was a graduate student there. And part of the process that we learned not only how to conduct oral histories in a sort of ethical manner, grounded in our own sort of histories as Lakota people, but we also learned the process of transcription, the ethics around transcription, and database, storage, creating indexes, all those kinds of things. Using the pedals, the transcription pedals to like slow down, speed up, as well as kind of debates around orthography. What do you include in the transcriptions? So that's what we're doing with this project, and we have outsourced a lot of the actual transcribing to a transcription service here, or that the university has a partnership with, called High Fidelity. And then Bethany goes through and audits these transcripts, corrects the names, corrects the dates. And when we do encounter Indigenous languages, and I think Ojibwe and Dakota and Lakota are the three common languages that are spoken in these or in this archives, we do kind of set that aside, because there's debates about what kind of knowledge we are allowed to share, because some of these archives were never broadcast on the radio station itself. And so sometimes they would go to an event and they would record, and an elder would offer a prayer or some words in an Indigenous language. And so this is one thing that we're working on right now, is sort of identifying those pieces. There's also copyright issues, because sometimes there would be music involved, and so there's limits to what we can transcribe and what we can actually reproduce in our writings. But the agreement that we came to with McGeezy Communications was that the American Indian Studies Department, in collaboration with McGeezy, would house for temporary purposes the transcriptions of these archives, but McGeezy would retain control of the audio. So we would just have the transcripts for research purposes. And that's a temporary agreement. We're going to renegotiate at the end of the summer, but we're really just here to provide that kind of service to them and to work with their board and what they want to build in terms of a legacy, or what they're calling a legacy archive. The second part of the oral history lab kind of is like what are we actually doing, and I'm a new faculty member here. I haven't taught graduate level courses yet. I haven't taught oral history courses yet, but I plan to, because it really is building on the work that I've been doing with several elders and across Indian country. So for example, in the top right hand corner of the screen, you might notice a familiar face. Does anybody know who that is? Does anybody watch Res Dogs? That's Old Man Fixico. But it's also known as Richard Whitman, and he's a Yuchi Muskogee Indigenous elder, also a pretty well-recognized artist and actor. And I conducted an interview with him, and this photo was actually taken by a former student of mine, Eunice Whitehead, and she and I went to the 50th anniversary of the Wounded Knee occupation. And in fact, you may not know, but Old Man Fixico, also known as Richard Whitman, was one of the last people to actually leave the Wounded Knee occupation in 1973. And he told us the story at the mass gravesite at Wounded Knee. At the end of the occupation on May 8th, 1974, he says, 4 of us decided to stay and were selected by camp security. We had our independent Oglala Nation flag flying. There was actually a flag that was created for the independent Oglala Nation that had declared independence from the United States during the occupation. the US Marshals lowered our flag and then did a gun salute like they do when they take a hill in Vietnam. They asked us to stand at attention when they started raising the American flag. Arvin Wells, a Comanche from Oklahoma, said, "No, you just lowered our flag and we're not defeated." So I thought that was a really cool story. And he shared that, and he hadn't ever spoken at any of these commemorations before. And we had a really amazing opportunity to sit down with him and talk. And then on the top left-hand corner of the screen is his brother and sister, Madonna Thunderhawk and Bill Means. I think Bill Means had a relationship with this department and this university when he was living here. And we did a walking oral history with her family and with Madonna's family. And Madonna always says the American Indian movement is a movement of families, first and foremost, and sort of really radically shaped how I view that movement and that time period and the legacy. And, you know, at the bottom left-hand screen is, you know, her kind of doing a walking tour with her son, Philip, who I don't know if you've ever seen in the Voices of Wounded Knee book, but he's the 10-year-old kid digging a bunker. But she brought him with her. She didn't intend to, you know, that day she talks about it. She's like, I didn't have a heavy jacket on. It was the middle of winter, didn't have my bedroll. And I brought my 10-year-old kid with me because that's what you do. You bring your children to these events. They didn't know it was going to be, you know, turn into this 71-day occupation in a firefight with federal, you know, troops. But those are some of the histories that I've been working on over the years, probably the last decade or so, with some of these elders. And, you know, the practice of oral history is really near and dear to my heart. And I've published, you know, several of the interviews that I've done with activists and, you know, people from the Standing Rock movement, as well as some, you know, Indigenous scholars. But as, you know, I think more famously, people might know me for the Red Nation podcast. And we view those as oral histories, much in the same vein that these Migizi archives are. And we, you know, my favorite podcasts that I've done, you know, on Indigenous oral histories tend to be the ones that, you know, aren't very, like, you know, well listened to or whatever, or well liked by non-Native people, but Indigenous people tend to like them. And I think if you want to listen to our you know, walking tour or oral history with Madonna's family, you can actually find that on our podcast. We did publish it, and we did publish the video. And so these are the kinds of things that, you know, we're looking forward to doing here in partnership with American Indian Studies Department. And I put this photo in here kind of as a joke because Tracey and David and everyone were really generous in giving us a lot of money to put this whole project together and begin this partnership. And Migizi was really excited, but we don't have a space. And that's the reality. We have, like, it's like Field of Dreams, you know, like build it and they will come kind of thing. But we do want a space, you know, and we do have budgeted all the technology necessary for an oral history lab. And, you know, as a lead editor for Red Media and a co-host for the Red Nation podcast, we actually rely a lot on the University of Toronto political science department, of all departments, to host a lot of the lab space that we currently use for our podcasts. And that's through my friend and my colleague, Ohiki Amele, who's a Kanaka Maoli scholar. And he's done a lot of amazing oral histories and podcasts. He does kind of these essays about Hawaii and the history there. He's also a beat and a slam poet too. So he's like he's better with words than I am. But also he's helped students create their own podcast series. And in fact, through partnership with Red Media, we've created a Quechua language podcast with some of the students there that's focused specifically on Southern Peru and the politics of the Indigenous people and you know, there, as well as another podcast that's based in, you know, Canada. It's called Indigenous Rising. And we're working on, you know, other kind of podcast series. And this is something that we really hope that the University of Minnesota takes serious, that other universities are doing this kinds of stuff. And we'd love to partner with the language programs, you know, and have a space, a culturally relevant and a culturally safe space. And I'll just give this anecdote and wrap it up, but we brought some elders from Little Earth here to the university to see an exhibit that was created at the Architecture Museum, and reimagining the sort of toxic landscape of the so-called arsenic triangle where East Phillips is located. And some of the students from architecture kind of reimagined that space as a decolonized, land back, reclaimed kind of space for these Little Earth elders. They're just like really impressed. It's like spacious, all this really amazing stuff. And they were saying, hey, well, where do you work? So we went over to Scott Hall, and I was telling them, I was like, yeah, we're gonna make this oral histories labs and this and that. And one of the elders said, oh, you guys are still in the basement? So, but nonetheless, they were actually really proud that there is engagement from our department in the community, and that we're showing up to these events, and we're actively engaged. And I've interviewed some of them for our own oral history project and stuff. And so there is a desire by the community for active engagement with our department on these projects. And so I just want to put that out there. I don't know who's listening, but it is something that Little Earth and the East Phillips neighborhood actually sees as a value. And there is a connection there still with McGeezy and the institutions that have been created from that really historic time, which is still ongoing. It's, I don't think it's, you can't really truncate it or periodize it. We are a legacy of that. And I think we have a certain responsibility to maintain that kind of relationship. So that's all I have for this presentation. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm wondering what was the biggest surprise as you undertook this project? Not necessarily in terms of university capacity, but in terms of what you're finding doing.
Bethany and I, at our last meeting, we met with Melissa Olson, and I haven't listened to these, but I don't know how to describe it. And I haven't listened to him because it's one of those things, and she kind of gave us a warning, but Chris Mato Nupa did a series of interviews in the early 70s in the mid 70s with Dakota elders about oral histories of the US Dakota War in 1862. And that to me was I was just like, this is really amazing. And so we're thinking of how to approach this in a and Melissa said, and she's Ojibwe, she said listening to these is hard, and so, but I think it's something that they wanted to share and that they, gave to McGeezy. And so I think there's those kinds of materials that are in here, because it's like the outtakes, right? When you see a video, when you listen to a radio program, those are like the end products. And we don't really see what, is on the cutting room floor, like all the work and the interviews on the ground that went into it. And the other one, I guess, is there was a Minnesota Citizens Commission on the FBI. And there's this interview with this guy named Joe Lafferty. He's from Cheyenne River. He's 16, 17 years old. And he was a student of one of these survival schools, these American Indian Movement survival schools. And he gives one of the most profound oral histories from a young person's perspective of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty and its relevance today. Because he's talking about how it's intersecting not just with the Wounded Knee takeover, but the building of military bases and the militarization of Lakota country, and how Ellsworth Air Force Base was a violation of that treaty. But his knowledge as an interpretation of it was just really profound. It was really you would hear maybe that at a treaty council meeting, but from a 16, 17-year-old kid, and just having that captured in the archives was really amazing to hear.
You talked about a physical oral history lab. So I'm curious, is that a conversation that's happening in the college in terms of are people looking for a space that's and if so, or if not, what's needed for, like, how big of a space would you need? You know, I'm just curious because I think it's something that would be beneficial, and I know there are lots of people who don't come to work regularly, so there's space. Yeah. In different, no offense to anyone who works mostly remotely, but I'm just curious as to how that, if that conversation is being held in a substantive way in the college.
Well, we just heard that John Gable's office is going to be vacant soon. I'm just kidding. No, we have had these conversations, and we've been asked to share space with the recording studios across the river. I haven't seen those areas, but then I went to the KFAI studios recently, and they have multiple studios, and it's just amazing. And a part of me just doesn't want to compromise on having our own independent autonomous space. And having visited the oral history lab in Toronto at the University of Toronto, they have a whole wing. They have a recording studio, and they have lab, and they have office space for students. And it's just really, and they have a fellowship, you know, for students to come in and do stuff. And there's this Indigenous woman from Western or Eastern Russia who's doing oral histories on Indigenous experiences with gold mining in Russia or diamond mining. And so that's the kind of thing that I think the university here should have. And it shouldn't just be a single-use space for podcasting or for whatever I'm doing, but for the language program, you know, everything that's going on, it's just needed.
Thanks.
Right. In terms of dimensions, I don't really have, like, you know, because I don't know. I mean, I know what I want,
sure.
But I don't know what the university is willing to give. Yeah, Rick.
You come across in Toronto, let's say, any other oral history, let's see, different ethnic groups background. How many of them have you came in contact with and spoke with, you know? Anything else in particular besides is that Germans from Russia you expressed? How many other different backgrounds have you spoke with?
Like
I have developed oral history labs.
Oh, I mean, that's a good question.
So Indigenous and Germans from Russia?
No, they're Indigenous people from Russia, or an Indigenous person from Russia, I should say. The eastern part. They're from the Sakha Republic, which was formerly an autonomous republic under the USSR, and then has now been incorporated within the Russian Federation. But she's Sardana. She's from that region, and she does oral histories and experiences of Indigenous people with resource development, specifically like gold mining, you know, oil and gas. There was some I don't know if it was uranium mining or if it was testing that was happening in that region too. And then of course Johanna and Renzo are working on a podcast in southern Peru, and they're doing it in Quechua and Spanish, I should say. So they do an interview in Quechua, and then they go back and do it in Spanish. But they want their approach is like to have it broadcast on local community radio, but also to have podcasts for people who don't live, the Quechua speaking people who don't live in Peru but live in, you know, North America or wherever, so that they can access these stories as well. So. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you.
So we are not going to have a formal break, but Nick is going to stay up here. And he and Vince and I thought we would have a conversation kind of taking stock of all of our many collaborations with AIS and kind of what it adds up to, what we've learned from that. So I am going to get us set up here tech-wise. The other window disappeared. Okay, we're not going to worry about the background. We're just going to be us. I want to quickly introduce Vince Diaz, who has been the guiding force behind many of these collaborations and really been such an important partner to Minnesota Transform since he's been chair. Who knew that when you say you're going to be chair, that you're also going to be connecting with all of these other people who aren't even in your department. Vince is an interdisciplinary scholar who has a presence in history, anthropology, cultural studies, and comparative and global Indigenous studies. He specializes in critical Indigenous studies in North America and the Pacific Ocean region. He has researched and published in topics such as Indigenous critical theory, traditional outrigger canoe voyaging in Micronesia, coloniality and Indigenous Christianity in Micronesia, Indigenous masculinity and sports in the Pacific, and trans-Indigenous theory and practice. As if that's not enough, he is also the founder and director of the Native Canoe Program, housed in the Department of American Indian Studies. This program uses traditional Indigenous watercraft and Indigenous water-based ecological knowledge and technology from across Oceania and the native Great Lakes and Mississippi River to advance community-engaged research, teaching, and service. Vince, do you want to introduce yourself?
Kasalalia Manko and Penane name Ponpe, Korkan Kausan Palkalo Nam Wayne Kichi, Buenas and half a day, Gohouse Vicente Diaz. Did just that and then did you want to introduce Nick or did you? Yeah, or just go
no.
He's still a professor in American Indian Studies.
Yeah.
He's still Nick Estes.
There's so much change on campus.
Okay. So Vince and Nick and I thought we talk a little bit about Minnesota Transform's collaboration with American Indian Studies and just name some of the collaborations that we haven't had a chance to discuss in depth this morning, and also kind of take stock of what that collaboration has taught us, both in terms of unearthing subjugated knowledge, but also taught us about the possibilities of these sorts of collaborations and the possibilities of universities. So I thought, Vince, maybe we could start by giving us an overview of the projects that AIS has undertaken and what it's doing.
Thank you. Before I do that, and I can just really just list some of these things, I wanted to, there were two things I wanted to preface this with to sort of frame it. The first is, and it's kind of prompted by how Tracey introduced me as someone who may not have been prepared to have to deal with a lot of other folks in the community and projects that was not necessarily as part of a chair's responsibilities. And I wanted to say, actually, that is actually that kind of relationship with communities and how one creates new knowledge is probably the most important thing of Native studies. It's certainly why I got into Native studies, why I'm still in academia, despite the fact that I still don't think I want to be an academic 30 years later. Because the field and what certainly spoke to me as an undergraduate 35 years ago was one that is supposed to be first and foremost accountable to Indigenous peoples. And in my experience, as with other people in my generation, it was because of colonialism that we didn't learn, that we were disconnected from our own languages and cultural practices. I was born and raised on Guam and was a jock. The reason why I went to college was to play football. So I didn't grow up with traditions and our vernaculars, and our parents insisted on English and mastering that, and I didn't even do that well. But university actually became the place where I learned about Indigenous histories and all sorts of things that we were never raised with, and I felt cheated, and I felt like, in a nutshell, university became that place that was transformative for me, that connected me to an Indigenous heritage that I've dedicated basically my adult life to. And so that kind of work that you saw in the form of an immersion experience that Deacon talked about and Zoe talked about, that we heard about from the language, the journal transcription and recording program, and what you see and what Nick just described. Those are just three of about a little over half a dozen other projects that Minnesota Transform actually allowed us to get back to in American Indian Studies. And it did one more thing. It showed us not only what we have not been doing collectively, and I'm not claiming success in any of these. I'm actually claiming that what it allowed us to do is to see what the department is supposed to be doing collectively, rather than simply as individual faculty members. All of us do engaged work with communities, all of us. But what we've learned is that our department has not been doing that as a collective enterprise. And the Minnesota Transform brought us collectively into varied relationships with a number of different projects that I would say, on the whole, I'm not satisfied with how well we have been able to progress. But this is not a criticism of Minnesota Transform or any of the practitioners of any of these others. I think that I blame the university, and I blame more specifically the fact that we don't have the resources and the capacities to do a much better job and do this longer time ago, so that the levels where we should actually be. We know that there are similar projects like this across Indian country in North America and the Pacific that are far more ahead than where we are. And this university and a handful of other universities that are supposed to be leaders in Native studies have actually been woefully negligent in making the resources available. Thank God for the melon. And thank God for my colleagues who worked hard to get that melon. The melon has basically allowed us to see what we're supposed to be doing more of in a concerted way. The next step usually in melons is for a kind of renewal that has the university's commitment to make it sustainable. And that's the biggest thing that we're seeing here, that the question of sustainability is uncertain. And that's already an uphill battle normally, given in universities as bastions of colonialism and settler colonialism. But we're facing a particular challenge in a kind of leadership void. And in a moment, all of you are aware that of the release of this truth report, this damning truth report. The second thing I wanted to say here is we've only touched the surface of how such projects are actually entry levels into better academic research, better, excellent knowledge production. One of the things I love about Native studies as a field is that though born out of political and social struggles by Indigenous peoples, we also reached a critical mass where more of us who for whatever reason, found ourselves in academia, we reached critical mass and we've gotten credentials and we started to take over the departments and move it in the direction that we want. I think one of the things that I love most about it is this firm conviction that we don't have to make a distinction between research excellence and knowledge production and being Native. And excellence in teaching, research, and service in academia must begin and foreground the relationships with Indigenous people. That their priorities and interests and struggles, when front and centered in academia, actually makes for better research than the convention. I actually really believe that. And so the point I wanted to make here is we've only gotten a taste of the kinds of things we're supposed to be doing. And in each one of these, whether it's the whole immersion language experience or the recording and transcription or the oral histories, we could spend not just days on that, getting deep and dirty in how that does, but how that kind of work forces us to think about history, the big categories: history, culture, identity, science, the environment, what it means to be a human, the big picture things that we're supposed to be doing in academia. Spending the time that is required in any one of these, and I will get to the others, it's actually the way forward for doing what universities are supposed to do. And yet that's still not, and yet we're still very marginalized in that system. So we've gotten a taste of how powerful and pleasurable, even if it's still painful, of the kind of work that you guys are doing. We've tasted what success looks like there. We know what it feels like when it's working. We know what happens if an article comes out from that, or better, a book. And we have those citations. There are books that's come out. There are conferences on oral histories. There's a field of Indigenous media that is quite sophisticated in how you theorize the use of digital media through the determinations and the imperative for honoring relations and centering trust and responsibility as necessary ingredients for research. So we're in this weird space where we've tasted the pleasure and the success of that kind of thing. We're able to build programs and with the help of funding like the Mellon, but we're still in this thing, this beast that just keeps moving along, and often in ways that just keep putting more obstacles in front of us. Let me just name these other ones and hope we can work our way back to this. So you had a sense of the immersion house experience for Dakota and Ojibwe, the Dakota Language Journal today and the Oral History Project. They're a really, really big one here that has all of these characteristics of pleasure, excitement, and pain and ugliness was the community education program, Community Language Access. This was basically Minnesota Transform paying for the tuition for anybody in the community to take our Ojibwe and Dakota language classes. That's so awesome. That the demand and the numbers shot up really. But like I said in the beginning, that also, what it also did was show us just how undercapacitated and under-resourced we are. And so the process of administering and managing that actually ended up also causing us a good number of headaches and black eyes with the community. That's not what's supposed to happen, but it did. There's the Minnesota Transform also funded the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, a really important interface between the program and the Anishinaabe world. People from that whole region, from the Atlantic all the way to the base of Rockies, Canada and the United States. People from there use this all the time. We attract students who take the language classes, and they're working on PhDs now. It's a success story. But we can't seem to get the funding to make that a stable entity with the staffing that it needs and the technology that it needs. The Minnesota Transform showed us again what the structural problems are here. There's a thing called the Decolonizing Campus Walking Tour. Hopefully soon enough, like a number of other campuses, visitors to campus and people in the community will be able to take a walking tour across the campus to key sites that have particular historical, political, cultural significance to Dakota in particular, also to Ojibwe, but also that speak somehow and center the question of decolonization and struggles on this campus to transform things. You've heard of the Truth Report. Minnesota Transform has also funded a lot of the activities that go into that. There's also a faculty advisory group started by the president called the Truth Advisory Board. And the relationship between that entity and the report is not very clear. But we know one difference is that this is a group of faculty members, mostly Indigenous, that is supposed to advise in that. But the Truth Report also had a process with MIAC, with the tribes. And so it's important for the university to step aside there too. But the relationship between the Truth Group and the Truth Report sort of also passes through the department. And so the department is going to play some role in advising the university about how to respond. And I can tell you, we have to sort of check that advisory role against our own responsibilities of rabble rousing, to demand that actually demand that the university make the kinds of changes. The upshot of the Minnesota Transform experience has been to convince us, to make it a no-brainer that all of the work that began with the Minnesota Transform and a bunch of other things, that's what we should have been doing with in a much more concerted way long time ago, that we demand now that the university fund make all of those sustainable plus more. Thanks.
Thank you, Vince. I want to just add something I should have said at the beginning, which is David Chang is in this room, and he helped us in the first stages of writing the grant and really was crucial to the genesis of many of the initiatives that Vince talked about. So I want to acknowledge his presence and his contributions to this.
Yeah, so I really actually wanted to say that too. Much of the resources went into Dakota language and Ojibwe and Dakota language programming that we have not been able to do for lack of resources. And so we really are indebted to David's familiarity with the program and sense of where the bulk of that resources from the Minnesota Transform should go. We have 3 degree programs in AIS, the Ojibwe language and degree program, the Dakota degree program, and the American Indian Studies degree. And they really should be the foundation of the kind of Native studies that we do here in Minnesota.
Thank you. So I think that was actually a really helpful overview of the kinds of initiatives and span of programs that have emerged over the past few years. And Vince, you articulated so well what the university's responsibilities are around this. Nick, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, or either of you really, about your sense of community interest in those initiatives and what people outside of the university have expected from the university and what you think there's interest in learning, in accessing.
Well, I can only speak on a limited kind of experience just with this oral histories project. And I think there's a lot of interest, and I think but there's also a question, there's skepticism as well as just a complete lack of knowledge of what's happening. And I think that's where, you know, things like the McGeezy transcription project can help build or rebuild, rekindle these kind of relationships. And there's a lot of potential there. But I think, like, from my perspective as somebody who was born and raised in Chamberlain, South Dakota, have relatives from Crow Creek and Lower Brule, I didn't know my relationship with the university actually began at birth. And I don't think people in Crow Creek know that either, who are exiled from, you know, the state of Minnesota, or nor do like a lot of Ho-Chunk people, nor do people from Sisseton, Wahpeton. And I think with the Truth Report, actually, you know, just looking at how the Canadian state responded to the genocide experienced at the hands of residential schools and the, you know, multi-year, decades-long kind of project that they've been, you know, trying to do with truth and reconciliation, however flawed that may be, at least they allocated and at least they acknowledged it, and at least there was a response. I don't really know what the response is from the university in terms of the truth report, or even really taking accountability, other than, you know, the projects that we've kind of seen evolve out of Minnesota Transform, our departments and our research. I don't even know what my community's response. I don't even think they know about it, you know, and I don't even think they know how they are affected by these university policies. And I don't think the administration should know now, but I don't think that was really well known. And I think that we're operating on this sort of deficit, not from us, but from, I think, on part of the university, of actually just really being accountable. And I think it gets to this other point too, that I think I've heard in all of these presentations today, is that we as a department and through these programs are not actually operating on a deficit model. We're operating on like the abundance of of knowledge, of histories, of, you know, work that's being done. And we're not just, you know, I think there's a kind of a tokenization that happens, you know, we're the I in BIPOC, and like, well, what does that mean? You know, do you put, you know, do you put entire nations in just acronyms, and then like that's what the response from the university is, you know? There has to be a deeper engagement. And I remember in my faculty orientation here, I was just telling Rick this, I asked, I think it was the provost, what the term Minnesota meant. And she like couldn't answer. And I was like, you don't know what that is, like you're saying that word over your University of Minnesota. Well, this is a faculty orientation. You orient yourself to this place and to these lands. And all she did was list churches that we could go to as faculty members if we wanted to connect with community or other community organizations, but did not even understand where that word came from. And I thought that was like, it was just really kind of like jarring to me. I was like, wow, this is a faculty orientation. Luckily, there was another Ocheti Shakoi, a person in there, Jessica Garcia Fritz. She was like, yeah, what the heck, man? But that's where we're operating at. And I was actually really sort of shocked when I came. I didn't, at least when I was in New Mexico, or at least in South Dakota, people kind of, they know, but they know because they hate us in some instances. But here it was just like a complete lack of knowledge. And I was actually shocked at like how thorough that kind of erasure was. And just the name of Pillsbury on the hall, the name, like these names don't mean anything really, unless they're contextualized within the Truth Project. And there's a relationship there, there's a relationship. The name Pillsbury isn't just about, little cartoon characters, that you poke in the belly and they say, ahoo. There's a relationship of starvation and rations that were issued to, not just Dakota people, but Ojibwe people as well. And how that wealth was built, and we actually have to have a full accounting of that. And so when we talk about public facing projects, that's where we should begin, is like why this university exists and how it accumulated the wealth and resources it currently has today. But I also just want to get back to, not ending on a sour note, but getting back to this notion that we're operating on with the assumption that there's abundance, that we're not just here to fill one role for a Native person or have like the Native person at the admin level. Like, we're not here to tokenize, we're not here to just create quotas. Like, there should just be Native faculty in science and art, whatever it is, that should be the norm. It shouldn't even, we shouldn't even be under the category of DEI. We should be outside of that. If it was a true nation to nation relationship, then it has to be with the nations that have also been exiled and kicked out of the state as well. And I think there's so much to gain in terms of, we're not just sending students to Morris, but we're also sending students to here because there's resources for them. There's a amazing American Indian Studies faculty. There's people in history, there's people in American Studies, there's people all over who will help in the humanities, but also we need to look at the sciences, and, people are going to get education in healthcare. They're going to be going back to these hospitals in border towns or on reservations. Are they being trained in a competent manner with knowledge about these communities that they're serving? And I think that's the bigger, that's the bigger question here. And I think the faculty are ready for it. It's just whether or not the university is ready for it. And I think the community is ready for it as well.
Thank you, Nick. So all of this has made me think about conversations I've actually had with both of you, but often, Vince, you and I have chatted about the capacity in an institutional way that's needed to sustain these partnerships and these relationships beyond initiatives and beyond faculty energy. What's required to really make ethical community engagement with Indigenous folks effective and a path to justice instead of extraction. So Vince, do you want to talk a little bit about what these collaborations have taught you about the kind of capacity that's needed?
Yeah, I think I wanted to start with a point that Nick made about deficit models and models of abundance. I think one of the other things that that one finds in the energy and passion of Native Studies faculty across the country and around the world is that we're not working out of that deficit model. We don't see who we are and what our what we do, our histories, our futures, for all of the horrific problems of the ongoing history of colonization. We don't see ourselves as deficit, and that's the biggest problem that we face in the university, that actually only has such a hapless understanding of what Native studies is about. It's so narrow and cloistered and sequestered. It's really quite insidious. That almost frames everything. So we the struggles we had, that one in the last year of chairing, where the chair's duties involves working with the college and outside the college in the system on any number of matters that involve personnel or programming. Very quickly we run into an attitude or a viewpoint that is just antithetical to how we move, how we see things. That one, I've always known it's been an uphill battle in academia as a faculty member. I made a sort of mistake in doing administrative stuff early in my career, so I didn't really understand how universities actually operate on the ground. And administration for most people is just a really not a fun thing at all, and not even pleasurable. And so it really turned me off. And so I sort of stayed in the faculty ranks up until 2 years ago, where I decided I had a lot to give back. I was grateful for the work that a lot of people have done. But it's really in that role where you see the nitty-gritty of how things are managed, how the discrepancy and the inequities and the power relationships translate into normative administrative practices that really determine and shape how things are. So that's one of the biggest things I've seen here, and that allows us to, and I'm working with amazing colleagues like Jigna and Tracey, David, Kevin. I've learned a lot about how to articulate those things in the context of the details and the minutia of administration. Enough to really wonder, to be right at the cusp, to be put right in that point of that ambivalence every day. Do I want to be an academic or not? 30 years later. You know, so far it's been good enough that it delivers. Much of my career has been about funneling university money to communities. And I don't care if I get in trouble. That's a really hard thing to do, because the rules of the game don't set it up like that. And if you do that, you'll be understood as doing a kind of work that really doesn't count in how research is defined. But I don't care, you know. But being encountering the abundance of resource of money from the melon that goes into these programs, only to see the sort of effects of deficit thinking in the everyday has been enough to just really exhaust you. But I'm not done by any means. The last thing I want to say is that if I can continue, it's because of the little things that has emerged in relating with students and community people when I see like what impact and consequence this has for people in the communities who are doing their work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I have often been frustrated by things that we experienced, but just as often I've been just so moved by the commitment of community members to access the university and also the commitment of university staff to try and make things work. We have asked enormous things of staff whose jobs are usually much more routine, right? They are used to dealing with subjects and members of the university community who understand how universities work and who understand their roles. And we have asked them to really stretch. And very often they have. So it's been striking to me, both the ways that this collaboration has brought us up to the limits of universities, but also showed us a lot of capacity that is in some ways untapped to rethink policies and to rethink practices. I would be lying if I said I saw massive change, but I have seen a willingness to rethink some things. And I have seen openness in a few areas around basic policies and procedures that has been really rewarding, as well as the success of these collaborations, which has just been extraordinary. The community access to language education, we were pretty blown away by the level of interest in that and the rapidity with which news of that spread was really, really striking to me. I wanted, oh, yes, go ahead.
Along the same lines, I think one of the things that's been really inspiring to me is also how staff that's emerged out of the woodworks to actually go above and beyond their duties and their scope of work to make sure that something is changed or something's done to make it right for the people in the community. They don't have to do that. They could just call quits when it's 4:30 or 5 o'clock, but they don't do that. And that's been, it reminds me of the importance of allies and people who actually believe and support in the project that's going on.
So there's a lot more that we could say. I want to honor people's time. Are there any questions? Any thoughts? Nick, do you have any closing thoughts about possibilities?
Possibilities? When I was working with UA with this podcast, I actually met a lot of people who were taking Anishinaabe or Ojibwe language in Toronto. And they're like, "Oh, you're from the University of Minnesota?" And they're like, "That's awesome." And they were like, and I was thinking about how unique it was that we had two language programs, like Dakota and Ojibwe, and then we also have two immersion houses. And it does, like, I don't want to end on a sour note, but I'm like, what happens next, with these things? Because we have the intellectual infrastructure, we have the academic infrastructure to sustain these programs, but we're not getting the kind of material resources to continue them. And, that scares me. But also I think it just shows you like how amazing, like you guys are like big in, you're big in Japan or you're big in Canada, as they say, which is cool, and I feel like there should be more of a recognition locally and internally within the campus around that success, despite all the odds, and I think that there is, just reading and talking with David and Jeannie and Vince about the history of this program, it's really phenomenal. It's a really amazing history, and as a department, it's gone through ups and downs. I think it's at a high point. We have a lot of core faculty, but I also think that the kind of impetus here is not. It's not. The ball isn't in our court right now, and it's in the admin's court to really take this on. But I also would just say that, you know, this department was founded by kicking in the doors, and we shouldn't be spending our time trying to justify our existence. And I don't think we do that. I think we're grounded in the community. We're known in our various kind of disciplines, whether we're doing language work, and we do a different kind of work, you know, than what, you know, I've worked in a department that was not solely about Indigenous studies, and I never confronted the same kind of challenges as I do here. And when I was asked by somebody, well, what do you expect as a new faculty at the University of Minnesota? And I said, just to be treated like a normal faculty member. But in American Indian Studies, because it is just kind of political by default, whether you want it to be or not, you're not going to be treated like a normal faculty member for all the bad things that comes with it, but for all the good things as well. Because when there is something in the community that's going on, people do ask you for resources and they do turn to you. And I think that's important, and that's our strength. And I would say that we've made our way into the community, and I don't think we're going to like leave that, no matter what the university does.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you all so much. Please stay around and chat. There are sandwiches in the back. Please help yourselves, and thank you for your time.